Hello and welcome to the Japan Archives, a podcast where we'll be delving into the histories and mythologies from Japan's long history. I'm your host, Thomas.
And I'm your co-host, Heather. We'll also be reading a poem for you every week and giving a little history about the poet who wrote it. Ikimashou!
So hello guys, welcome back to the Japan Archives. What we on now? Episode 30.
Ooh.
Oh, we've got quite a lot under our belt now, which I'm kind of happy about.
Like it's 30, it's mourning its youth.
That's so mean to say about our own show, but okay.
Cut that.
Now, we are obviously going to be getting this episode out Friday the 7th of February. So what I wanted to do for this week is talk about one of the festivals of Japan, the festival known as Setsubun. And that was this week. It was on Monday the 3rd. Yeah, I want to talk about the history of it, how it works, stuff like that. So obviously we've been in Japan now for 3 years, quite a long time. So yeah, we've been here for 3 years, so it kind of seems redundant to ask you, Heather, if you've heard of the festival before. But I'm going to do so anyway, as we do every week.
Well, Thomas, for the intents and purposes of this podcast, why no, I've not heard of this before. Please enlighten me. Does that help?
That helps a little, so let's assume ignorance here, and I'll jump straight in. So, actually, the notes I have, I actually wrote this 2 years ago as a blog post for my very first old version of the website, which eventually became the database we're now working on. Back then, I was kind of just, when we were with our old ALT jobs, there was obviously, well, for me at least, there was a lot of free time at school while I was sat waiting for lessons. So I thought I'd start doing like a Japanese blog. 1 week I'd actually write some history about Japan, and then the next week I'd actually do a post about a poem and a poet. So you can see where I got the ideas from for this podcast 2 years later.
See the history.
So yeah, the blog sadly died a death as work got quicker, and then I moved down to Chiba. But yeah, it was reincarnated as this podcast.
I would say metamorphosist, but metamorphosized?
Metamorphosized.
Yeah, so it evolved.
Yeah, so the blogs became the podcast, and the site changed into the database that we're now building up on for people to look at if they're interested in Japanese history. But anyway, so the Festival of Setsubun. So what is it about, really? So to start with, there is a saying in Japan which says that on the eve of the beginning of the spring season, to place the heads of sardine and holly is to ward off the devil known as Kaguhana, a devil who is said to eat man. Now, I don't know about you, Heather, but I would much rather stick the head of a dead fish and some holly leaves on my front door than risk being eaten by a devil, or oni as they're known in Japan. And this is where the Festival of Setsubun comes into play. So it is a festival centered around the protection and the prevention of oni. So once again, we're on the topic of oni, but I'm going to say this to listeners now. Don't worry, we've actually planned pretty soon an episode on the oni, so we can bring together everything we've already said, as well as get into the nitty-gritty of actually what they are, who they are, why they do what they do, and stuff like that. So yes, finally we're gonna have an oni episode.
It won't be our one and oni.
Oh, that was such a bad joke. What? I'm gonna keep that in the episode. So the Festival of Setsubun, it can fall under the umbrella of what is known as the Haru Matsuri, so like the spring festivals in Japan. Now we can translate the name of Setsubun as something like Seasons Division, which I think is kind of an apt name considering it's kind of slowly working its way towards the end of winter and spring is just around the corner.
No, it's like, yeah, I've noticed that even in stores and things that or even like the bumps for TV shows, there are spring imagery that are coming into everything now. So like, sakura, cherry blossoms, that's starting to emerge.
Expanding very quickly on the idea of there being like regional differences, I actually found reference of one small village actually in Chiba Prefecture where they don't call the festival Setsubun. They actually call it Toshi Koshi, which we can translate as meaning something like bidding the year out. So again, around the idea of like seasons changing, years changing kind of thing. But of course that might get you wondering like, but the festival is actually in February and not at the end of the year. And of course you would be correct. However, like we've said, you have to take it in the context of that this festival is set up to be a portrayal of the onset of spring. So it is a new year, but it is a new year of like new life beginning.
Historically, I think a lot of things revolved around like rice planting season. So I'm wondering if, like, because it is in the early February, like rice planting season, people have already gone through the fields, cleared out the old, or starting to clear out the old rice that may have not, like, because when you harvest rice, sometimes the rice grains will like replant and they'll start growing plants. So now people are going to start to clear out all that old growth and prepare the rice fields for planting. So I'm wondering if where it's mean the bringer of spring is that start like, hey, rice planting season is on. It's get ready to start.
Oh, I like that idea. I didn't actually know about that. So
I've seen people start burning to clear out all that old growth, and it won't be too much longer.
I've seen a lot of the farmers near around my school when I drive to work. They've got their strange, tiny Japanese tractors out on the fields, getting everything ready for the rice. So what I quickly wanted to mention to you next was actually where we can find the origins of the festival. So obviously you're pretending to not know about this festival, Heather, but do you already know of its origins, or is it more you just know the aspects of the festival?
Now, the origins I can claim ignorance on. I'm not sure about those.
Okay. I think you could probably guess that it can find its origins in China. Japan has, over the many centuries, taken a lot of characteristics and aspects from the Chinese culture, the kanji, a lot of their poetry. So they have taken a lot over the years from China, so it makes sense that a few festivals as well would find their way here. So the festival made its way from China to Japan and was initially characterized by the adoption of throwing roasted soybeans so that they could drive out evil spirits. And obviously that eventually changed to the concept of driving out the Oni instead. And we can actually find first mentioning of this festival around 935 AD, and we actually find it in someone's diary, a man by the name of Kino Surayuki. Now, I previously did some research on him, and he was actually a poet, so we can talk about him later in regards to poetry if we want.
Ooh, yes, please.
A little bit about him quickly. He was interesting in that he helped compile one of the imperial waka anthologies of the time called the Kokinshu, and he is also the man who, in the preface of the Kokinshu, he wrote a little bit about who he thought were the 6 best poets of the Heian period at the time, and we now know them as the Rokkasen, or the 6 poetic geniuses. And our poet from episode 2, so Ono no Komachi, was actually given the title of one of the 6 poetic geniuses, and she was actually the only woman to make the list. The other 5 were men. So yeah, he also wrote this diary called the Tosa Nikki, or the Tosa Diary. And the interesting thing about the diary, so it was written, like I said, in 935 AD. Again, he filled it with poetry throughout, and he was actually interesting in that he wrote the whole thing in kana script, and throughout he refers to himself in the third person, such as the traveler or the passenger or the person. At the time, the reason he wrote it in kana was because he wanted to try something different, and he actually starts his diary by saying, "It is generally a man who tries to write what is called a diary, but now a woman will see what she can do." So he actually wrote it specifically in kana in an attempt to write it as a woman, as kana was the female script at the time and not used by men.
Amazing. Oh, he is. That is interesting. That is fascinating. I did know about the like the kana, like usually like women would use the hiragana and men can use katakana. And I actually encountered this pretty recently because there was looking at old like comics, like really old comics from like newspapers from around the turn of the century, and the men's writing was all in katakana, and I was really surprised by that. I was like, well, why is it in katakana? He's like, oh, that's because it's the guy's voice, and if you see women's voice, you would see it in hiragana. So wow.
I actually didn't know about the katakana thing until you you told me, I think last week when we were talking about it. But it's actually nice that we've managed to now fit it into this episode to tell everyone else about it. But yeah, I find that really interesting because I, obviously, when you come to Japan and you look at the language, I always assumed, or at least was taught from the books I read, that katakana was more used for foreign words. Like it was a syllabary designed to use words that they had adopted from the modern outside world when they opened their borders. So to find out that it was actually more of a also masculine type of language as well initially, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'd have to probably check more of my sources more. Well, my source so far is the professor, but for this particular instance, it was an old comic from a newspaper where the character was speaking all in katakana. The male character was speaking all in katakana. So, and you know, as time has gone on, everyone uses all three syllabaries: the kanji, katakana, and hiragana. So I think maybe historically more it was for that, but nowadays it's not quite so. Yeah, that's something we'll have to research and look into, and that gets into more complicated topics, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Going to read the specific passage now in the diary where he talks about like the first instance we have of the Setsubun festival. What he says is, I wonder how it is in Kyoto. Are the customary decorations of straw rope, mullet head, holly, and the like displayed? And this is the sentence that shows to us that the festival of Setsubun had been adopted in Japan. Now, obviously, in modern day Japan, they use sardines heads now. So the sentence itself is interesting in that it shows that although the festival itself hasn't really changed too much over time, there has been certain aspects. So initially they did use mullet instead, but now they've changed and they use sardine in the festival. So with the origins out of the way, let's learn how to banish the Oni during the festival. So like we said, the primary function of the festival is to do this act. It is to protect you from these devils and these demons, because basically you don't know, Heather, if there's one living near your house or not, so it's best to take precautions. So what you need to do is, first of all, you need to make sure that you have a really large bucket of soybeans on hand, so if the Oni do show up, you can start throwing them at it. But also, just merely throwing the beans will not be enough, so you need to say the following incantation as you do so. So the incantation in Japanese would be Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi, which would basically mean in English, demons out and fortune in. I'm actually going to say that I'm a terrible human being, and sadly, I've always been working when the Festival of Setsubun has actually been on, so I've never had the chance to actually do this or go to a temple during the festival. I'm just wondering if you have or not, so you can explain what it's like if you have been.
I went to 2 last year, actually. In one day. Was it one day or was it like 2 different days? So I went to a small shrine in, I think it was near Futsu. And this one was in the afternoon. And there were several people. They stood up at the front. We all gathered around. And the people who threw the okashi, I think they weren't the priests. They were like different members of maybe the shrine committee. I'm not sure what that's called in Japanese. So essentially, they will throw snacks or okashi, mochi, and little packs of soybeans as well. And you are supposed to grab as much as you can, because whatever you grab helps to bring you luck for the next year.
Okay.
Now, the really fun thing about this is, Thomas, you know, in Japanese society, like waiting for a bus, waiting for a train, waiting in line for food. How how do people generally act when they're waiting for something in Japan?
I mean, all the queues I've ever seen, which are super long, they kind of just do nothing. They're just like statues. It's really bizarre.
Like polite, quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. They don't yell and shout like, "You broke in line, get out of my way." You don't have that at Setsubun. That's gone. That's off. People will grab and reach. I got like someone poked me with their nails last year. I didn't get cut, but I got a nice little scrape on my hand. And not just that, but if stuff falls on the ground, people would scramble to pick it up because, hey, the more you collect, the better luck you have. I was so shocked. The amount of like grabbing and reaching that went on. This is at both temples, and I think it's everywhere. So I was surprised. I did not realize. I thought people just politely catch. No, they did not. They were going to get that luck. I did not get so lucky. I got a very few things. At one place, I actually got something and gave it to a little kid because I was like, oh, they can't reach. So here. I found out afterwards I gave away some of my luck. So I think maybe that was good.
It was nice of you to give it away, but I'm super surprised of what you're saying about the like all decorum seems to go out the window when it comes to this festival. Like I've been to other festivals I've been fortunate to go to, and yeah, it's like any normal day in Japan. Like everyone's super polite and things like that. But yeah, to hear the Setsubun one, it's like all goes to hell. That's quite interesting, but also really strange. Like I can't imagine it because I've just not ever seen it in Japan.
No, I'm sure I'm probably and maybe exaggerating a little bit just because I'm so used to certain things going in a certain way, and then to have that. But I mean, you've seen kids play like karuta, right? It's competitive. Like they definitely, when they do undokai and they do like sports or competitions, they try their hardest. So I think maybe they are just trying their hardest to get all that good luck. What's the word to put? I've gotten so used to kind of waiting in line quietly and politely, and I'm not the kind of person to reach out and grab things very well anyway. I'm a little bit slow at it. So maybe it was a little bit of shock because I wasn't expecting it. So I don't think it was like all hell broke loose, but it felt like it, just the contrast and what I've been to before and what I've seen now. And I sadly didn't get to go this year. I would have liked to have seen if it was the same here. So I wonder if like in Eastern Japan versus Western Japan, and even like, in Hokkaido versus like Fukuoka, like how people do Setsubun in the different areas.
It would be an interesting comparison. So maybe, hopefully next year you'll get the chance and you can report back.
Yeah, I hope so, because I enjoyed it last year. It was very fun. And so I get to just like watch people like try to get the okashi. And that one itself was entertaining. Although one poor kid did get hit in the head with soybeans.
The poor child.
I was like, I couldn't help him because I'm like, he was crying and I was like, I'm sorry, I really can't help you. I felt so bad. Soybeans right in the face, like a little pack of soybeans.
But is that lucky? I mean, he then got the soybeans, right? So there is that, I suppose.
I think he caught them. I mean, not with his hands, but he caught them. So I'm going to say
he caught them with his face. So I'm going to count that as lucky.
Poor baby.
Poor kid. So you've got your soybeans. You've thrown your soybeans at the Oni, and you've said I guess you could call it a magic spell to some degree. You've said your magic spell. So what comes next? So we still have the holly and the sardine heads to deal with. What you need to do, you need to take your holly leaves and you need to take your sardine head and basically hang it from the entrance of your home.
Only thing is, I wonder about the cats that would come.
Hopefully the cat wouldn't be able to reach it because it's at the top of your door.
They're very enterprising, those cats.
That is true. If they want it, they'll take it. If you're wondering why you need to hang these things over your door, then here is the reason. So, at least in regard to the sardines, apparently they only have a big fear of their eyes. It said that basically if they appear at your door and the sun is shining on the eyes of the fish because of the way they sparkle and will shine, it basically causes the oni to be filled with fear and they will basically run away from it. Of course, again, with this being a countrywide festival, I did find some regional differences that you might come across. It said that some villages instead will hang large buckets from their rooftops instead and cover them in a kind of mesh to mimic the eyes of the sardines. All of the journals that I read that mentioned these, they've said that they are a good alternative to sardines if you don't happen to have any, and that they will serve just as well and just as effectively at causing the oni to run away. So yeah, if you don't want a fish hanging from your front door, just buy yourself a bucket and some mesh and it will be just as good.
I like that better.
Yeah, I think I like it better too. Less disgusting.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with the holly. So if we want to find the answer to why we need to hang the holly outside our door, we can turn our attention to a particular type of play. Now, this play is called a kyogen play, which is a type of comical Japanese theater. In the text of one of them, the scene is set where we find an oni wandering around, and it's said that he has come from a place called the Place of Eternal Youth. I am exceedingly tired, the oni says, and I am very hungry. Now, looking around, the oni notices a structure in the distance, and so he exclaims, "Oh look, there's a house! Let me take a look." So the oni wanders over, and it's said in the play that he immediately regrets his decision. "Ouch!" he cries. "How painful!" he screams. "I forgot all about this night being the night of Setsubun, when people put holly at the door to scare us away." And screaming that his eyes were now in extreme pain, he fled.
I think I'd probably put some holly bushes in front of my house in that case.
So there you go. There's the story of the holly, and basically that it serves as a way to make them run away because they will apparently just walk into it. So I don't know whether they have very bad eyesight or very bad at noticing things, but apparently, yeah, hanging the holly from your house will protect you even more because the oni is likely to walk straight into it and run away in pain. Well, there you have it. Anyway, that is the story of Setsubun, the origins and how the festival works. I'm glad that there were some bits you didn't know about. I was kind of worried about this one because obviously, like I said, we've been here so long, there was the potential for you to already know everything, and this would have not been that interesting for you. I'm glad there were some bits you didn't know, and I hope you found it interesting, at least today.
It's really interesting. I mean, we've been here for about 3 years, but there's still so much we don't know, and we know a little bit about a few different things, but there's still, especially in detail, we don't know everything. So it's really fun to learn new things, and I really enjoy it. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you liked it. So, obviously that is now my section done for today. So, what do you have for me?
Interesting enough, before I go into my poem, which I have a poem today, did you see the advertisements for the roll sushi at like the maybe kombini, the grocery store, around the time of Setsubun? I think it was like the day of Setsubun. Did you see that?
I did not.
But like on the weekends when you go to the kombini and stuff, did you see the signs for the roll sushi?
I didn't. I'm sorry. I've let you down. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I think it's a relatively new tradition to eat like the rolled sushi. I think it's the time of Setsubun, and you're supposed to face, I think it's the northwest direction, and you're supposed to hold it with both hands and then eat the whole thing quietly without saying anything.
And why would you be facing the northwest, Heather?
I was actually hoping a little bit that maybe somehow you were going to touch about that on Setsubun.
Oh. No, that's interesting. I didn't know, but it also makes sense with everything we've already said before about bad luck and stuff.
So I was going to say, we did not do the roll sushi, but I did have fajitas with like soft tacos. So we did a hybrid version of a rolled food, but we did not stand in the northwest corner and we did not eat it without talking. But we did do, on Setsubun, we had a rolled type food for good luck.
Okay. Oh, I wish I'd known about that as well. That is super interesting.
So yeah, if anyone knows about that, let us know. And we'll do some research too, especially now Thomas knows about it. We might do some research and maybe we'll touch back up, maybe a bonus episode. That might be interesting, but please let us know. So now on to my poem. I have a poem for you from, you'll never guess where it's from.
Is this a specific book, or are we on about a person? Because if it's a person, it's going to be Basho. If it's a book, we might be heading back to the Hyakunin Isshu.
Why, yes, you are correct, sir. I do have a poem from the Hyakunin Isshu, and it's from Emperor Koko.
Emperor Koko.
Yes, Emperor, or actually, I mean, Koko. I think it's like Koko, not Coco, like in as the, I think it's the gorilla, but Koko. Forgive my bad pronunciation.
Not Koko like the Disney movie.
No, not Koso, Koko. It's got
Okay.
the long marks over his O's. So Emperor Koko was the 58th emperor of Japan, and he was born in 830 and died in 887. And he became emperor because he was only emperor for about 4 years. So that was because he died at age 58, but he became emperor at age 54. So a very short reign. And this emperor, he brought back some of the traditions that were like ancient, which is interesting because ancient court rituals, because it's like 884, I guess he would have become emperor. Yeah, so he brought back a traditional hunt with falcons. He brought that back, and he brought back some other court rituals. And he also wrote poetry, and he has his own collection, the Nina Gyoshu.
No, I don't think so. So if you want, you can do your poem.
Are you ready, Thomas, for the poem?
I have my pen and paper ready, so I will endeavor to try and figure out what today's poem is about.
All right. 君がため春の野にいでて若菜摘む我が衣でに雪は降るつつ.
So I think I heard from the second line haru, so spring,
Yes.
and Kimigatame I have heard used in other poems before, but I can't quite remember what it translates to, but I do recognize it. For most of the other bits, I'm not too sure, but potentially the last line was something like snow is falling. So yuki wa, like furitsutsu, like furu, to fall.
Yes, you're right. That's wonderful. So the translation is, for you, I came to the fields to pick the first spring greens, and during that, on my sleeves, there was a light snow falling.
I was wondering what the significance of the sleeves are, because I do know that from what I've been reading around, there are a lot of poems that use like sleeves on clothing as a big part of their imagery. So I'm just wondering what the actual significance of it is.
So I think the sleeves aren't what's important. In this poem, you notice what he's doing. He's coming out for spring greens, but it's still snowing. So even though maybe the first signs of spring are starting, it's still winter, it's still cold. So the sleeves themselves aren't significant. What's on the sleeves is perhaps the more significant thing. So I think this poem perhaps is more of a nature imagery based on some of the information I do have, which is, why was he going out for spring greens? Is that a thing that emperors do? I mean, most emperors I know would not go out and harvest their own greens. Well, that's because there was an annual picking of the young greens that took place every year, and it was a celebration for the Ninohi, which is a Day of the Rat, and this date was around like maybe mid-February, so actually around this time. So it was a ceremonial picking of the greens. So February, usually, well, we had that little warm patch of, see, back to weather. We had the warm, but we had this week, it's gotten colder here, and even funnily enough, the reason I picked this poem is because I saw snow flurries recently here. So we've started to see the signs of spring. Some of the cherry, like the plums, have started blooming. There was a beautiful yellow tree that I saw. My friend told me what it was, and I've got to remember the name. And some of the daffodils are popping up. So even though the first signs of spring are starting, the cold weather, the snow still reminds us it's still winter. Now, there are different kinds of herbs that were part of this picking, and they were chickweed and actually some sprouts of daikon. So these were used to help ward off evil, so probably So this was written when he was emperor. So this was before we had the mention of Setsubun, which was in your previous message. That was like, what, 935 or 934?
935, yeah.
Yeah, maybe predating Setsubun. Going to pick the greens would help to ward off the evil. And also it's supposed to, the long spring greens could help you like have a long life, which unfortunately for Emperor Koko did not work in his favor. Now, in the Menyoshu period, the women would have done this plucking, but Emperor Koko was a man. So during the Heian era, the men also would pick these spring greens.
Okay, so it changed over time.
So yeah, I think interestingly enough, the poem was not looking for a Setsubun poem. I seem to have found a poem that does kind of dovetail nicely with your topic, and also a really good time of year for reminder that it is still winter. Spring is stirring, but winter is not letting us go yet.
It's very true. I mean, like you said, like especially here, like today is the coldest it's been so far. Like we thought we got past the worst of it, but it's getting colder. But I'm hoping soon it starts to warm up again. Like we said, winter is drawing to a close, finally. It's been a very strange winter though here. It hasn't actually been that cold until now. But no, it's a very nice poem that you found. I like that, yeah, like you said, you found something that predates Setsubun, but was also used as a way of bringing in the new year. So that was very interesting. And again, a maybe not festival, maybe festival is the wrong word for this, but like a ritual which has changed over time. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have any other questions that I might not be?
For today, for this poem, I don't think so, no. I mean, the few questions I had, you answered, so thank you.
Yay! Excellent. You're very welcome.
Okay. So yeah, I think that might be all of everything from us today.
Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi.
Yes. Like we say every week, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you again to the few new listeners we have this week. We've grown a little. We're very grateful for that. If you like Japanese history, check out historyofjapan.co.uk. You will find the show notes up on there for this episode, as well as obviously all the other articles we currently have on our database. We're up to about 730 articles now. Next week for you guys, episode 31, we're going to be delving into a samurai. There are people who would say she wasn't a samurai as she was a woman, but she is basically the closest a woman I think ever came to becoming a samurai. So we're gonna go delve into her story next week. So we hope you come back and tune in for that one. I am also hoping next week to get our third bonus episode up for you guys. It will link back to our good friend N the Pilgrim from episode 22. I found out a little more, another story relating to his life. So yeah, I hope you look forward to those. Heather, do you have anything more to say before we sign off?
No, I'm looking forward to next week too. And again, yeah, thank you so much everyone for listening. Please come back next week and we hope to talk to you then.
Okay. Thank you again, guys. We'll talk to you next week. Mata ne.
Mata ne.
If you've enjoyed the Japan Archives, please consider checking out historyofjapan.co.uk, a database we are making on Japanese history. You can also find the show notes for all our episodes here. If you're on Instagram, you can follow my account over at nexus_travels. That's NEXUS_travels.
We also have a Facebook and Twitter page, which you can find at Japan Archives. If you're interested in little slices of life in Japan, be sure to check out my website over at heatheroveryonder.com. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, have anything you'd love to hear about, head on over to historyofjapan.co.uk and send us a message.
If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give us a rating and review over on iTunes. Thank you again for listening, guys. Until next time, bye.
Mata ne!